Hello and welcome to another video of That Fabric Guy here on YouTube. My name is Bas and today I will be talking all about lakehouses in Microsoft Fabric. So let's dive in and see what we can do with the lakehouse. Okay, I'm here in my laptop. I'm looking at an empty folder in my Fabric workspace. The workspace is called That Fabric Guy and I have a lot of objects and folders in here. I've created a folder for my lakehouse examples. Now, if we want to create a new lakehouse, how do we do that? It's fairly simple. You click on New Item, you wait for a bit, and then if you favorited the lakehouse object before, you can simply click on Lakehouse. If you have not done that, you go to All Items, and you will find the lakehouse in this massive list of objects that you can create. If you cannot find the lakehouse, it is right here, but if you cannot find the lakehouse here on the top right side of the screen, you can search for lakehouse, and there it is. You can simply click this tile, and you can give your lakehouse a very nice name. So let's call this lakehouse demo, and let's enable lakehouse schemas for now. But be aware, there is no support because the feature is still in preview. So you need to understand that, but overall it seems in practice that this is a pretty stable feature right now. So I've given the lakehouse a name, I enabled the lakehouse schemas public preview, and I click on create. And now my lakehouse is created. We are inside the Lakehouse Explorer. Okay, so over on the left side of the screen, and I'll zoom in a little bit because the screen might be a bit too small. Over on the left hand side of the screen, we will find the Explorer with all the objects in our lakehouse. There will be tables and files in the lakehouse, and I will show you in a bit in another existing lakehouse what those are doing. Within tables, we have the option of creating schemas, and DBO will be the default schema. So if you have not created any schemas yet, you will have the DBO schema just like you would in a SQL Server database. The DBO schema would be the default. Now I can click here and I can create new schemas. So when I want to create a new schema, for example, for my ingest data, I can do so, and I can start putting tables in there for my ingestion. All right. I cannot start creating new tables from here. I need to create new tables either through copying data into the lakehouse using PySpark notebooks or data pipeline copy activities or something like that. I cannot create new tables in here. I have to do so through code or through a pipeline. I can create new table shortcuts, however. And what is a shortcut in a Fabric lakehouse? A shortcut is a way to access data that is in another lakehouse or another data lake, if you will. It could be Amazon, it could be an Azure Blob Storage account. There's quite a few data lakes that are supported for shortcuts. And what you can do is you can access then data that is physically not living inside your lakehouse, but still in the host lakehouse. But you can query it as if it is a local table. So that's actually quite cool. You don't need to copy data a lot. You can just refer to a data set, point your shortcut to it, and that will work. I will show you today how that works by creating a shortcut to another lakehouse in my own Fabric environment, but this could easily be a shortcut to a file, for example, on a Blob Storage account. So we click on New Table Shortcut, and it will launch the shortcut wizard for me. Now I can already see that there's quite a few table sources that I could be working with. I could connect to an Amazon S3 bucket. I could connect to Blob Storage accounts, to Data Lake Storage, to Dataverse, to Google Cloud Storage. But in this case, I will be connecting to Microsoft OneLake because there is a lot of stuff that I've already created. So let's look at, let's look at my Gold Lakehouse in here in That Fabric Guy. And I now get a browser, a table explorer, if you will, for the lakehouse that I'm referring to. So I'm looking at the Gold Lakehouse, and I can browse through all the tables that I can find here. And I find here the icons. Let's zoom in a little bit more. The tables that say silver have a different icon. There's a link icon in here, and these are actually shortcuts that live in the Gold Lakehouse and a shortcut to the Silver Lakehouse in this case. So we can find those as well. Let's create a shortcut to the Gold Dim Taxi Types table. Click on Next. And then from here, we still have to create it. The status is not being created yet. The shortcut name will be Gold Dim Taxi Types, but we can change that. We can click here on Actions, and then we can change this to Taxi Types, for example. When we hit the check mark, we can then create the shortcut. And that actually worked pretty well. Let's see where we did that. We did it in the ingest schema because I clicked on the schema and then clicked create table shortcut. All right. Now, because I'm in the Lakehouse Explorer, I can start clicking on objects and I can find out about the different types of objects, and I can get a preview data loaded. This might take a while, so we will cut that out in the video. And here we are. This preview is not that fast, so be aware that the Lakehouse Explorer will not show you data previews in an instant. It will take a few seconds, but my experience is that if you've done it a few times, it will basically warm up the cache or something like that, and queries will be a little bit faster. So right now what we're seeing here on the screen is our taxi types table, and you can see that the shortcut is called taxi types. So we have now basically a table. We can work with it as if it's a table in our Lakehouse that's called taxi types. And that is pointing to another Lakehouse, to the taxi types, or to the dim taxi types table. In my preview here, I can see that there's an ID column and the taxi type column. And if I scroll to the right, no, that's it. And it's showing me 4 rows. And that is probably because this table only contains 4 rows, right? There's 4 taxi types in this data set. There's not millions and millions, but if there were millions of taxi types, or if I were looking at a table that contains millions of records, I would probably get a 1,000-line preview here. All right, we can work with the data here a little bit, so we can filter using the interface that you might remember from Power BI, right? So the filtering interface here looks a bit like Power BI, and you can simply work with your filters and with your data like this. All right, so that's all pretty cool. From here, from the Lakehouse, we can do a few things. So now we have a Lakehouse that contains data, or actually it contains a pointer to existing data. From here, we can do a few things, and we will do so actually on the next Lakehouse that we're going to look at. And here we are in our Silver Lakehouse. This is one of the other Lakehouses that I want to show you, and the reason I'm showing you this Lakehouse is that I want to show you a Lakehouse that actually contains a lot of data. My Silver Lakehouse there's a lot of taxi type, taxi trips, taxi pickup zones, and so on data in this Lakehouse available. So let's look at that. So there is a preview that we can see right here, and you can see that there's 7 columns and 1,000 rows that are being loaded. Well, know that the for hire vehicle table in our taxi data set should contain a couple of millions, maybe tens of millions of rows. So there's only 1,000 rows in this preview. Okay, we can, however, work with the filters like we're used to. So we can say we filter only for the 206 drop-off location ID in this case, and now I get 1,000 rows that all say 206 drop-off location. All right, so we can still keep working with the filtering like we're used to. Then after clicking a couple of times, we will probably have lost this example. There we are. Now what I want to show you is that in this Lakehouse, there's a few things that come to mind. So one is we don't have schemas enabled in this Lakehouse. This is an older Lakehouse. I created it before I started creating schemas in Lakehouses. So under my tables folder, I just see the tables. There is no schemas there. Okay, what we see here is that I've put silver as a prefix in my table names. And usually today, at least, what I would advise to do is use these prefixes instead of in your table names, use them in schemas. The thing is that we can use schemas in security that I will touch on in a minute. We cannot use table prefixes in our security. Okay, so schemas actually would be a better choice here to say silver.fhv instead of silver_fhv. Another thing that comes to mind is that my files section here is now, it's not empty anymore. So underneath files, we see that there is a folder called landing, and under the landing folder, it will take a while, there's a TLC taxi data or taxi limousine company taxi data folder, and then there is a couple of years with folders, and then within those folders, there's more folders and files and so on. So there is a folder structure here, a file structure, if you will, on our data lake that we can browse. And here we find the actual Parquet files that are in our data set. Now, this data set is the actual raw data that we have downloaded from the taxi and limousine company. The New York City TLC gives you this data for free. You can use it in your projects and your demos like this one. So that's actually pretty cool. If you Google for TLC New York City taxi data, you will find the data set. You can download all these Parquet files yourself as well. Be aware though, it's a large data set. It's, I think, 4.5 billion rows if you take all the history from 2009 up until the current date. So that will be quite a lot. So what we can see here is that our Lakehouse not just contains tables, it can also contain files. Now, files are the unmanaged part of our Lakehouse, so we can dump any file we want in here. It can be Parquet files, CSV, JSON, XML, etc. These are all structured or semi-structured data files. We can put JPEGs and PDFs and all kinds of unstructured data in our Lakehouse as well. All right, so this is unmanaged. You get folders, you get files, you decide what to put in there. This is great for a raw landing zone, okay? So if you have an API that gives you Parquet data or JSON data or CSV data, you can dump it in the files section of your Lakehouse. You can store it there. Storage is very cheap in OneLake. And from here, you can start processing the files with your Spark notebooks and so on to create Delta tables. So the tables are the managed part of your Fabric Lakehouse, which is where you get your structured data. Now, actually underwater, if you open up the hood and you start looking at your tables, then the tables themselves are actually files in a folder structure as well. A Delta table is nothing more than a folder with a Delta log and some Parquet files for data storage. I have another video and a few blog posts about how that works. But at least from a front-end perspective, if you're working through the UI or if you're working through applications such as Power BI or Visual Studio Code, the tables part is a managed part where you get managed Delta tables. All right, so that's the difference between tables and files, managed Delta tables versus free file format. Anything you want, you can put in there. As you can see here, there's an icon for a link for a shortcut here as well. So landing is actually a shortcut that is pointing to another lakehouse. In this case, it is not pointing to any files that are in the silver lakehouse. These files actually live physically in my bronze lakehouse. And in my silver lakehouse, I've created a shortcut to that landing folder. And therefore, I've created a shortcut to all the folders and files that are beneath that landing folder. All right. So if you start working with a folder structure in your lakehouse and you want to shortcut that to an upstream lakehouse, like I did between bronze and silver, my advice would be to put a root folder in there. And do not start putting folders and files in your lakehouse just like that. Put one folder on top and then start your entire structure underneath that single folder, because it will be that much easier to shortcut all of your data, and all the new data that you will add to this folder will automatically be available through the shortcut. So basically we have now here our files and folders in an existing lakehouse. Now there's a few things that we can do here. We can query the data in our lakehouse using the SQL Analytics endpoint. So on the top right side here, we can switch between lakehouse and SQL Analytics endpoint. Let's do that. If the UI wants to work with me. Yes, there we are. And now we are in the query editor of our lakehouse. Here on top, you can see that we're still in silver, but the icon is a little bit different. Now the SQL Analytics endpoint lets you query a lakehouse using SQL queries, and that's actually pretty cool because if you're like me, you know databases, you know querying, you can use SQL to browse the data in your lakehouse. Now let's look at the schemas, and then under DBO we find tables, and this is actually quite funny. There is actually the three-part naming convention here. So if you have a lakehouse that is not schema enabled yet, you can find your tables under the DBO schema, because the UI here will assume that you will have the DBO schema in there in order for the querying to work, in order for the endpoint to actually function as if it were a SQL Server database. All right, so we can click here to create a new SQL query, and we can start writing code. We can say select star from DBO dot, and then let's look at the taxi zone lookup. There we go, and we can run this query. Take a few seconds, and then we get the results in here. Now let's say we want to see only, oops, that's a typo, where borough equals Manhattan to find all the zone lookups in Manhattan. With Command Enter on a Mac or Control Enter on Windows, you can execute queries, and here we can find then all the things that we might use. So we can use SQL syntax here to do so. And we can also use other things than select star. We can say select location ID, comma, borough, comma, zone. And there we go. And now we have just these three. Now let's say we have this number we want to do calculations with. Of course, a location ID is not something you can calculate with, but let's assume we do. Then we can say location ID multiplied by 10 equals, as some column name. And then we get the the location ID multiplied by 10 as a new column name, okay? So any SQL syntax that you're used to working with, you can use that right here to browse the data in your lakehouse. All right, so that's pretty cool. Let's close this down. You can, by the way, you can download the SQL database project to open in Visual Studio Code, for example, or you can open the queries that you have here in Visual Studio Code or SQL Server Management Studio. So using SQL from the browser is an option, but you can also use the SQL from a client application that you're familiar with and that you're using for other things as well. Let's close the SQL Analytics endpoint again, and let's look at what we can do in the Lakehouse here. For example, we can create a new semantic model. So if you're working with Power BI as your reporting layer to serve data to end users, you can use semantic models in order to actually serve data to Power BI. And by clicking on New Semantic Model, we can semantic model demo. We can create a new semantic model in here, put it in that Fabric Guy workspace, and we can put all the tables. Oh, let's just say all the tables in this Lakehouse. We can put that into our semantic model. And now a new semantic model will be created in direct lake storage mode. That means that the data will not be copied into the Power BI semantic model. It will still reside in your Lakehouse. So physically there will be delta tables stored in the Lakehouse. And then after waiting for a little bit of time, there will be your semantic model right here. And from here you can do basically anything you're used to doing with Power BI semantic models. The only thing is this is the online editor, which is great for me because I use a MacBook instead of a Windows device. So I cannot use Power BI desktop without doing virtualization and so on. This is actually quite cool that we can manage the semantic model, the data set that we used to call it, through the browser. So that here in Safari, I can actually start creating the relationships between my tables, writing DAX code, doing row level security and calculation groups, and anything that I would like to do in my semantic modeling in order to actually serve Power BI reports to my end users. So this is also one of the things, besides the SQL Analytics endpoint, that we can use to serve our data to an end user. Now, the last thing I want to show you that could be important if you want to work with lakehouses in Microsoft Fabric, and I've created another video about this, is your One Lake data access. So that's it for today. This is all about creating lakehouses in Microsoft Fabric. You now know how to create a lakehouse, how to enable schemas, and what you can actually do with your lakehouse. So start using Microsoft Fabric today, start using lakehouses for your storage. Happy data engineering, and see you next week.